Hello, my name is Michael Perez, and I'm starting up a devlog video series to showcase the progress I make on my projects throughout the week. The vast majority of what I go over will be game dev related, but I'll occasionally deviate to talk about other things. With that in mind, I'll jump right into what I've done. My current project has been an idea for a game I've had in mind for a couple of weeks now that I wanted to prototype. It's a local multiplayer action game in which players play as discs and shoot at each other with guns. The gimmick, however, is that players aren't able to move. They can only move via the recoil from shooting their guns. As an added element of chaos, there is no friction, meaning that players are able to theoretically build up speed infinitely if they time their shots well. The game is intended to be a casual party game, in which the controls are simple and the matches are quick. The first thing I wanted to do in development was make sure the physics were correct. This meant the players should never be able to break out of bounds with enough velocity, and they should correctly apply a force to each other upon colliding. I spent the first day experimenting with a raycast approach, as I wanted direct control over how everything happened. It could handle a single player moving at whatever speed I wanted, but it quickly became too complicated for me when I introduced other players, as I then had to implement the ability for them to apply force to each other. I spent the second day working on two more alternate implementations for the physics: Unity's innate rigid body system, and a hybrid system that blended raycasting and rigid bodies. I was hesitant to commit to Unity's rigid body system, as I thought it wouldn't be able to handle the speed at which the players would be moving at. But I learned that setting the rigid body in question to continuous collision detection rather than discrete assuaged all of my concerns. The continuous setting impacts performance more than discrete, but because there would only ever be 4 or less entities on screen using that mode of collision detection, I figured it was worth it. I haven't noticed any performance issues thus far, so I'm probably gonna stick with it. With the movement system working, I spent the next 2 days implementing the gun system. Inspired by modular systems like The Binding of Isaac and Enter the Gungeon, I really wanted the guns to be as modifiable as possible. Rather than pistol shoots pistol bullet, I wanted it to be weapon shoots projectile, and both the weapon and the projectile would be modifiable. The weapon part of this system dictates how fast it fires, how accurate it is, if it's automatic, and if anything unique should happen upon firing, such as the shotgun firing multiple bullets at the same time. The bullet part of this system dictates how the projectile behaves once it spawns, how much damage it deals, how much force it applies, if it's a hit scan or a physical projectile, if it causes explosions, and so on. With a custom inspector for modifying the projectile characteristics, I really wanted to give myself the tools to easily create whatever weird weapon I wanted to put into the game. It's still somewhat limited, but it's more than enough for the prototype. With a basic movement system and weapon system in place, I was able to test out how it felt to play the game at its most fundamental level. The prototype looked exactly as I had envisioned it when I started working on it, but it turned out it wasn't fun to play. The central premise of the game is to strip the player of most of their control, and as it turns out, games aren't very fun when you aren't in control. I was on the fence about continuing the prototype, as I hadn't put too much time into it to allow sunk cost fallacy to take over, and the idea was feeling more and more like a bust. I would have been fine with that, as that's the point of prototyping. If it's not fun, why bother? However, I demoed what I had at a local game dev meetup called OC Indies, which I attend every month. The consensus of the folks there was similar to mine, in that it didn't feel good to play. Rather than scrapping the project, they made suggestions on how to improve it, as they felt like the idea had potential. The player either A, needed more control over the movement, or B, needed a goal that encouraged utilizing the movement system. They provided the suggestion of something like a capture the flag mode to encourage players to utilize the weird system to traverse the screen and capture the enemy's flag. Someone also suggested to make it more obvious which way the player was aiming. So, my plan for this week is to address all of the aforementioned concerns. The easiest will be the visual change of making it clear which way the player is facing. After that, I'll address the movement concerns by giving the player more control. As was specifically suggested by someone at OC Indies, the easiest way to achieve this would be to implement a brake button which allows the player to slow down and stops them from moving while they're shooting. Another thing I wanted to experiment with was adding friction to player movement. This would be easy enough to do, as rigid bodies already have this built in, but it would require tweaking a lot of the recoil and force applying values of the weapons. Hopefully this was an okay overview of what I developed this week. At the moment, the only purpose of these videos is to archive my progress as a developer. Because of this, I'm not intending to spend any more time on these videos than is needed to recap what I did during the week and what I plan on having done by next week. With that said, I'll be back sometime next week with the second entry. Right now I'm thinking I'll upload an entry every Friday, but that's tentative. Thanks for watching, and if you end up sticking around, I'll see you next week.